Hey, family, good evening. Listen, when you are in these days with the platforms that we're using today, where many of us are beginning to delve into what it means to handle our own media. How about that? And with it comes a lot of freedom, comes a lot of discretion. Also, the responsibility of learning how to use the material, the apps, the product that we are accessing for the kind of freedom we want to be. In that, I can tell you sometimes it's just human error, user human error. And so for me, it's sometimes I didn't push the right switch or I didn't click the right button. However, I digress. This is Bishop John Selders, and I am godly pleased and proud to be coming to you tonight once again on these airways, using the multiple platforms that we have at our disposal to talk about things that are I think that are important, and to use our lens of faith and justice to do so. So tonight, I'm going to spend some time talking, as I have in many instances on these moral Monday evenings, talking with friends and colleagues and folk who I think are interesting, people who are doing some fascinating work, people who I think, if I think they're interesting, you'll think they're interesting. If I think their work is intriguing and certainly life-giving, I think they're worth spending some time in conversation with. And tonight we have one of our friends and colleagues and our partners in the work who I'm gonna let him talk about his shift a little bit in that work. However, it is clear to me that this opportunity that has come will allow for he and the folk he's working with to do even greater work and for us to be in even greater partnership with one another. Let me bring to this platform our friend and our brother, the Reverend Teran Loeppke. I always get your name all tore up from the floor, Teran. Loeppke. Now, did I get it better? I'm better. That's what I don't know what's wrong with me. Anyway, it's my dyslexia. I'm gonna call it my dyslexia. Brother Teran, come on into the room. I appreciate you very much being willing to join us and to talk to us a little bit about it. Why don't you greet the folk and say hello to everybody? Yeah, user error again. If you unmute, then there we go. Uh-oh. Nope.
There we go.
There you go. see, this is the blessedness of this platform. Boy, we can tear it up for a minute, but we're going to get there. We're going to keep trying until we get there.
Well, we did get my name right. It is Loeppke, and there is a story there on that name. Whether or not this time around it makes sense to tell it, we'll see. But thank you, Bishop John Selders and Moral Monday CT, for having me on. It's always a pleasure. And I am thrilled to make another connection this evening.
Yeah, amen. I'm glad to have you as well. Teran, so I want to go back a little bit and let's locate how we got to know each other. I met you, it must have been maybe almost a decade ago or so, maybe.
That's in the ballpark, I think. It would have been in 2018.
Okay, that was a little bit.
Yeah, early 2018, perhaps.
Okay, I thought it was longer than that. Okay, so all right, that in 2018 would place us at 5-6 years ago. Let me tell you the meeting I remember. We met at a local. It was my spot in my neighborhood, and you brought one of your children.
Yes,
and they were so well mannered and it's just so sweet. They let daddy talk and then we got to talking, and then all of a sudden the phone started blowing up, and I think that must have been mom on the line saying and so we had to make a quick getaway. But I remember we were engaged and engrossed in the conversation about some of the work you were doing, some of the organizing work you were doing, and some of the work we were engaged in. So that's the memory I have.
Well, and we talked about our common Chicago, the Chicago connection we have in common.
That's right. That's right. That's right. But those of you all that don't know, Chicago, Illinois, it's the town just south of heaven for me. That's it's the town just south. I'm just listen. Don't be mad. I'm just telling you, it's my opinion. It's only my opinion. I love Chicago very much. I'm a Midwestern boy. I grew up in St. Louis, and so Chicago is a Midwest town, but it's a big city. And so it had all of that which was familiar, which is still familiar to me. And yet it's a much bigger city with, several million people in the region and in the area. And I had a great almost 3 years plus there. And then we came out here where the Lord has planted us for the last 23, almost 23 years. So yes, we did talk about our Chicago connection. I remember that as well.
Yes, and it's like if you get rid of Cook County, the government, and you take the towns of Connecticut, and it's like Chicago is this, it's this big pile of Midwestern towns, all literally annexed into the city of Chicago over time. And it's kind of like that, it can take just as long to drive from one end of Connecticut all the way to the other as it can from the one end of the city of Chicago all the way to the other. So
that's right.
And you can drive through just about as many former municipalities that still behave and act very much as, independent neighborhoods. It almost feels like going from town to town when it's neighborhood to neighborhood. Now that I've been in Connecticut a little while here, and I can sort of feel the similarity and differences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is true. I used to explain to people. In fact, I've lived in several places across the country in these many years. And one of the things that I found very similar and also dissimilar from my experience in Chicago. In Chicago, you have these large, huge thoroughfares, these avenues. Big, 7, 8 lanes sometimes, huge, big. And then and they get big houses. What I had come to know and learn that all of those big avenues are all connected. They're connected by the roadways, and Chicago is built on a grid for the most part. We can blame Mrs. O'Leary and her and kicking over the lantern or whatever in the Great Chicago Fire. That the mythology around that is well overrated. But when they redesigned the city of Chicago, they designed it with that in mind, that it would be very easy to transverse. But there are 5 diagonal streets, just 5. And all of those major thoroughfares are connected, and they're connected by the parks. And the park system connects those. It's a very fascinating city. The wealthy lived in the same neighborhood as the very poor. For much of Chicago's 100-year history, so because of that. And it's a very interesting place. You come out here to Connecticut. We have the same kind of wealth, and maybe even a little older wealth, right? Living right buttressed up right next to much of what our poverty is here in the state of Connecticut. And so that's where it's kind of similar. It's interesting. You would be one of the few people I've talked to about, the connections between a city like Chicago and the multiple municipalities and neighborhoods that we would call towns. And they operate like that too. They operate very, very independent, but also kind of connected, right? So it's a very interesting data, which leads us to, you came out here, you found a little gig, you were doing a little part-time work, and you was part-time daddying and part-time that work, and working for Common Cause, Connecticut. For much of that time, you were doing, some other little projects as well, and you have some interesting news to share with us, right? And it's been in that work and in your capacity doing largely work with, around voting rights, and some other kinds of work, where we found you were doing that, when we met, and then that work now has shifted a bit, into another kind of frame. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your new offering?
Well, I guess I feel very lucky and fortunate to be working well with you, Bishop. It's really nice that our relationship can, survive and move through, my change of workplace, as I go from the voting rights organizing at Common Cause in Connecticut. Yes, for 3 years I was, and now I'm officially at the Collaborative Center for Justice, which is, I'm the director there. I will not be able to fill Dwayne David Paul's shoes, the former director, but I will try my best to fill my own shoes, with all the help I can get from people like you, Bishop, and Moral Monday CT. And so the Collaborative Center for Justice, if anybody out there has never heard of the Collaborative Center for Justice, it is quite an interesting organization. We were founded in 1999 by 6 congregations of women religious. And by that, I mean what you may normally think of as an order of nuns, for example. I haven't heard the word order or nuns as much as I've heard 6 congregations of women religious, And in 1999, the women religious of these 6 congregations, and don't quiz me on the exact names of each yet. I'm not that old yet. I'm still too new, and the names are still, I'm still learning them. Only, full time a weekend and part time a month and a weekend. So, but in 1999, they felt really confident about the charity work that they had been doing for a very long time, and there's a group of them had come together and we're doing this really solid legal clinic as well as another ministry, and each of the congregations had their strengths, serving the poor, and they decided to make the jump into social justice advocacy and get at the root questions of why, and how to change, the system that creates poverty, because we do live in a system that creates poverty. It's not like it always existed it's not like, on the 7th day God created poverty, you know, and on the 8th day God rested. I mean, poverty is a human construction, right? And so are all the other ills of our society. Racism, white supremacy, you name it, all these things, sexism, patriarchy, all these things are human constructs. None of them have anything to do with God, I think. And so they decided we're going to form a social justice organizing group, and in fact we're going to form a 501c4 organization, not a C3, so that we have the ability to do unlimited lobbying, and really be free to advocate on our values, specifically up at the legislature. We want our faith power to have a way to build our faith power and impact policies that make life better for people in our communities. So I'm really excited to step into this line of, hard work and dedication. What's really interesting is that the sisters themselves, right from the beginning, they co-funded and co-founded this organization, and to this day still do. And it's the sisters fund the work. And originally it was 2 co-directors. 2 of the sisters themselves were the staff for quite a long time, and Dwayne Paul came on and was here for a few years, and now, I am just really thrilled to be stepping into it. You, Bishop, you remember the whole this is way predates me, but Corrupticate and the whole thing with so what do you tell me what your take on that whole thing was with Corrupticate, and was it What was the governor's name?
Lord, you're gonna take me all the way back to the beginnings of my coming to Connecticut. I remember this organization, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But so what we had is, you all would remember, we had a governor who was in office, who dibbled and dabbled and ultimately had to resign and was imprisoned. And you all remember him. And so it was then, after that governor went away, we got another governor, his lieutenant governor. I'm sorry, the governor's name was John Rowland. Mm-hmm. And so when he had to go away for a while, his lieutenant governor, who came through the ranks as she was in the PTA and parent, involvement, and rose through the ranks and political ranks. And lo and behold, she was lieutenant governor, and after a fashion became governor. Jody Rail was her name, or is her name, and she served us for multiple terms. It was a very interesting time. I had occasion to be to interface with Governor Rowland, and then soon after Governor Rail. They were interesting folk.
So was Governor Rowland the one with the fast cars and the hot tub?
No, don't say it out loud. Don't say it out loud. Yes, he had a. I think politically speaking, he had fast cars, hot tub, had a place on the shore, and maybe had two places on the shore. We don't know.
Were you at the action where they put an actual hot tub on a flatbed truck?
Yeah, I was around.
And
I remember that.
Well, the Collaborative Center for Justice was in on that. And there is a quite beautiful photo that Sherry Quickmeyer dug up, the executive director of Common Cause in Connecticut, that has this beautiful photo of two of the sisters in this hot tub on the back of a truck at this action, getting media attention around the state of corruption. And I thought, I brought that up in my interview.
That was some wild times. I can tell you. I had just arrived here, quite frankly. So we had a couple of things going on. So we had Governor, Rowland and the things spinning around him. Here in Hartford, we had just elected a Latino as mayor, and we were in charter revision. We went from every 2 years a new mayor to every 2-year terms, and our mayor was really, quite frankly, a cheerleader, and kind of for honorifics and picture taking, but didn't really have any juice. The person who really ran this city was the city manager. That's the person who had lots of power, along with the council, city council. And so it was under Governor Rowland's leadership, support, along with then Governor Mayor Eddie Perez, that they came together and worked a thing. It doesn't slip my memory that both of them left office in disgrace, quite frankly. But here in Connecticut, that's kind of that's where corruption came from, because we had a number of both governor and several mayors who left office under a cloud. And here in Hartford, we had well, I won't talk about all the sort of details of political leadership that found themselves in lots of slippery slopes, shall we say. Yes, but I was around during that time. I remember the two sisters in particular. They would just kind of roll up, show up, go in the back the back seat of the car that they showed up in, and out came their signs, and they would hit the line. It was just the funniest thing. It was the funniest thing to see. I believe her name was Sister Mary. I can't remember the other sister's name, but they would show up ready to go. And I remember them, both of them coming up to me at one point saying, "Bishop, we're with you." And they one of them pressed a little something in my hand, and it was a little something soft to support the work. I was very appreciative of their token and their gift. And they were also around when we arrived here in 2000. There were spinning. We had our own version of a police shooting. The young man that was killed, his name was Aquan Solomon, and the Center for the Cooperative Center for Justice had just begun. And not long after that, there was a community-based organizing effort that predates what now is called GIA. They were also kind of a faith-based organizing group, and it was the center's your organization that also supported and came around those conversations as congregations were trying to figure out. So let's just say this is not new news that faith folk have been around justice-oriented work, right? And so they were asking questions. They were doing their thing, trying to figure out how can we use and leverage our faith to be involved in stuff. And I also remember, I guess now we're talking 2007, 6, 7, 8, where we had it looked like this thing keep going in a circle. It keeps going in a circle. We were talking about budgets, and a number of us came around table, and I remember these sisters, and they had a young man that had begun to show up around some scenes, and some other folk, and we were talking about what does it mean to have a moral budget. And we started a campaign to presence ourselves at the Capitol in this state and in several of our other municipalities to talk about what in fact were clear issues that here we are nearly 20 years later talking about the same stuff all over again.
You mean they're not fixed yet? They're not fixed yet, Bishop?
They're not fixed yet at all. They're not fixed yet at all. So talk a little bit about so these 6 congregations, these religious congregations, and I'm appreciative. Let me just say this: I'm appreciative of the fact that they are religious women who said, "Hey, faith and justice are going to be our rallying cry, and we're going to work together. We're going to pool our resources." And I love this kind of history. The organization that I worked with and for many years did the very similar thing. In fact, several of the organizations I've worked with and worked for over much of my ministry have come from the activism of religious folk, faith folk, church folk, who say, "Hey, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to help to create some groups and organizations and ultimately institutions that they funded, and then memorialize that funding vis-a-vis endowments and all that actually keep these organizations alive and keep the work of justice alive." And of course, that work has changed over the years. What hasn't changed is their commitment to doing what's right by folk. And I appreciate very much this story and this narrative and this happening within our lifetime. The organizations that I'm referencing that I've worked for, predate all of us. They go back, here in Connecticut, they go back, a couple of decades and a century plus. Right. But these organizations are the organizations that help to found, for example, the Village for Children and Families, People don't know that organization started by a faith-based group of people that came around them. Hartford Hospital wouldn't be hospitals. Faith-based organizations started places like hospitals, for example. St. Francis, y'all know about St. Francis Hospital, for example? That's faith folk got these kinds of institutions. You ever heard of the YMCA or the YWCA? What? Those are faith folk who made commitments years and years and years ago, and then again built institutions around that. So tell us a little bit about the work that the Collaborative Center for Justice.
Center for Justice. Yeah, not to be confused with the Center for Leadership and Justice, which is the organization that out of which has grown GIA, the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance. But yeah, I mean, Bishop, by way of segueing into that, yes, absolutely. The congregations of women religious have founded schools, hospitals, so many institutions that we rely on to this day. When we think about the Catholic Church and the legacy of all those many beautiful things that have happened, how many times was it, the persistence and dogged leadership and just persistent work by all of these women who were not the people up in the pulpits, getting the public credit, but just through the decades doing the work on the ground to make these things happen. And that you're right, it's just beautiful. I mean, since 1999, they've never stopped. They continue to fund the work and believe in it and drive it. And so there's been several things over the last few years that they've been prioritizing. One of them is immigration reform, and connecting on that front with folks who are facing injustice here due to their immigration status. There's also been anti-racist conversations that have been happening with the Collaborative Center for Justice, which are really positive. I just had a meeting this morning with Kimi Okeke, who is our congregational organizer and one of the board members. Well, no, she's not actually a board member, the person we met with today. But she was talking about the connection with GIA. Actually, we're a member of the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance, and there have been some really solid anti-racist organizing sort of initiatives and conversations within that, which we talked about this morning. There's the recycling / trash plant at Mira on the south. In South Hartford, where I guess 70 towns, this is new for me in learning. It sounds like 70 towns have been sending their trash to South Hartford for decades. And it's been then either incinerated in the plant that was burning the trash. This sounds right, Bishop? And or shipped out to other poor working class communities of color across other states who then receive the trash, right? And so the plant has been shut down, and there is a drive now to actually close down Mira because there are problems with how it's running, and to start up a waste management authority, but, and this is the key, that has 50% representation from Hartford residents themselves on its governing body. And I just think that is a real testament to the vision of what, community-based leadership and organizing and ownership is meant to be. Because for all these decades, well, way better than me, I'm sure, Bishop, all the ins and outs of this story, but to have received the trash, literally the trash from all around the state, and then have it burned into dust and land on everybody's yards for all these decades, and to have no say in what happens with the cleanup. Apparently, there's still suburban towns that nearby that they still get money from this thing. Anyway, there's even though they're not doing anything. So I'm excited to learn more about this issue that, granted, for me is new, but maybe you can tell me more about it, Bishop. This initiative around community ownership of what happens with the cleanup in the future of the site.
Well, for me, it has to start with Mount Trashmore here in Hartford. What you are speaking of is the current conversation that's afoot. But there are folk who listen to us and who pay attention to us and who know about just north. If you're driving north off of I-91, just north of downtown, there's a little bit of a hill, a little mountain, a little bit of a hill to the right as you're going north on Interstate 91. And you would think that's just natural. That's just a natural terrain. Well, of course it's not. It's the floodplain because the Connecticut River is just east of downtown Hartford. What that is the collection for nearly 40 years of trash from not 70, but from what, we were able to find out 200 plus cities and towns across Connecticut and across New England that brought their trash, that delivered their trash here. And then there was a treatment center, and they do all the stuff that they do with that. But then you ask the question, we have probably the highest rates of asthma and juvenile and infant asthma in the country, the highest rates per capita of young folk with asthma. And you wonder why? It's because of the environmental injustice that has been going on unchecked, while millions and millions of dollars are made that the community didn't have the say so around it, or two, doesn't get anything but sick over it. And nobody knows anything. There have been a number of community-based organizations who have worked on this issue. I'll name several of them. One Chain, back in the day when we arrived, they were one of the more powerful organizations that had words to say and had efforts to address what was happening there. The Ministerial Alliance at one point or another, several versions were also involved in this conversation. It's very interesting to me. And now we have this, what's going on the south end. This was a north end issue, but on the south end, here we have this another similar thing. And thank God they stopped, the incineration. But now we still got you got to untangle all of that. And what continues to concern me, and not just concern, it's troubling, quite frankly, that you'll start digging, you'll find out more, you'll find out more, you'll find out more, and you go like, wow. And there'll be people who may have heard about it or who may know about it, but who are somewhat complacent. And I don't, and please hear me, I'm not blaming in some sense, but they've been beat down because you say something and you organize and try to do something, and maybe you get a bit of momentum. Somebody gets paid off, and it goes away. And the folk who get paid off get nickels and pennies of the real money that gets made. And the injustice continues. I find that to be the truth across the board. And in my estimation, Brother Teran, it doesn't quite add up to do what's right by folk based on the policies that get made. It's not rocket science. People need jobs. People want affordable places to live, clean and affordable places to live. They want viable options for educating their young people and themselves, for that matter. They want some place where they can go to get quality care. I mean, the asthma alone is a huge problem, And of course, in these urban centers, like in a place like Hartford, the same thing exists down in Waterbury has some issues around it. Certainly, Bridgeport has had, they had their version of this. And in these instances and cases, what folk need is a place to even get checked on, so they can find out, is this asthma, or I'm wheezing and can't catch my breath. So they want a place where they can get adequate health and care, and all of that's at question. One, can you get care with health? That's a whole nother subject and matter. But these are one, appropriate issues. Two, they're not hard to find them. You can just take a walkabout, take a drive about in our urban centers here in Connecticut, and you'll find that these disturbing realities, and you'll find at the end of those are largely Black and brown folk, right? And so it's certainly clear to me that if we're going to talk about justice, what continues to call me and trouble me, if you will, it is, Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, the story that's gifted to us by the Gospels, where Jesus talks about, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you gave me clothes. When I was in prison, you came to see about me, And Jesus in the way he taught in his kind of, parables, these stories, he was a great storyteller, they tell me. The Gospels give us that Jesus was a great storyteller. And then the disciples said, well, Jesus, digging in the head, this in my sanctified imagination. That's why I feel like, they would kind of me with old people. You have been around old people and they start talking, and they all these references, they use language you don't know what they're talking about, and they tell stories, and you'd be like, what are they talking about? And all of a sudden, maybe sometimes years later, you go like, oh, that's what they were talking about. I feel like that sometimes with Jesus. He was doing the same thing. The disciples were around, and he said, the disciples said, Jesus, when were you in prison? Whenever were you hungry? Whenever were you naked? And then Jesus said, when you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. That text speaks volumes to me, and is one of the centerpieces for me that calls for the witnessing we do when it comes to issues like injustice. Police brutality and overreach is directly related to that for me. Education and unemployment and all of the environmental issues, white supremacy and racism. These are all those troubling, disturbing realities that I think our faith calls us to at least both be a voice, but also be a witness, and use our voice and our witness to help policymakers set a different course.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think some of the work that you all. So talk a little bit about what's the vision, what's the plan for the right now, the near future, and then be a little bit bold as to say what is the Lord saying to you as it relates to the work of the Collaborative Center for Justice.
Well, so coming in the door, I'm coming in doing my best to meet people and listen to their passions and desires, and get an understanding of what an organizing we might call their self-interest, the things that keep them up at night, the things that they really care about and think need to be fixed in our society. And so I'm working on that with our congregational organizer and meeting with the key folks in the Collaborative Center for Justice, including the board members and the sponsoring council members, and and it's a part of that. I am focused on mapping out the current status of when I say our, I would say the voting power of, the key leadership of the Collaborative Center for Justice, because of when they founded, they wanted to use their collective numbers to add value to campaigns that were happening to help win. It was quite a beautiful vision, and it remains that way. And so what I'm doing is starting out is just working on meeting with folks. So where do the Sisters of Mercy actually live? What are the communities like where they do live? What are the issues going on in the communities where they do live? And figuring out, and I'm just not that this has never been done before, but I have the benefit of coming in new to have a renewed focus on it. And so mapping out the communities that the women religious live in, and then learning and listening to what's going on in the communities where they are, and then figuring out the allied groups and organizations, and just doing the whole paying attention to all of the very valuable campaigns and issues that are being fought as we speak. But I guess what I'm saying is, coming in the door, I'm really paying attention to the fact that these congregations of women religious had the vision to start this up, still fund it, still are dedicated to it. And so how can we make good on all of that energy and love that has been poured into this, and also do the hard work of being part in a genuine way of anti-racist coalitions and movements and projects locally. So it's not just Hartford. There are folks that live in other places around the state. So there is a statewide focus. It's not just Hartford. But the office is in Hartford. And so, we are active on the voting rights campaigns. The things that I was working on at Common Cause in Connecticut. Wednesday, there is a town hall in Hartford at 6 p.m. at Capital Community College on the Connecticut Voting Rights Act. So the long and the short of that, and you already know about this, Bishop, because you were in the first conversation that got had between Senator Lesser and Sherry Quickmeyer and the key folks that pulled together 3 years ago now, if I'm not mistaken, was the first time that issue was raised here in Connecticut. Well, I'm sure you know all about the $200 million that came out last week, and the new budget surplus, and that sounds like a lot of money. And you know what? It is a lot of money. And I understand the way that power works, and there's probably a lot of it's already spoken for, quote unquote. But let me ask you this: don't you think it'd be worth $4 million to buy a database to keep track and have an infrastructure to pay attention to voter suppression based on race in places around Connecticut for the foreseeable future? Doesn't that sound like a worthy expenditure of $4 million tax dollars, especially when we just found out there were 200 million extra ones that were not already projected?
That we didn't know about at all, or somebody knew about, but we didn't know about, but somebody knew about them. Absolutely, I think it's a worthy cause, especially since the vote is the centerpiece of our alleged democracy, or democratic republic, however you want to slice that.
Yeah.
Right? That's to vote, the power to vote for our representatives, who then set policy in order and make law, quite frankly. And we're not willing to come into the 21st century around that, with just something simple as could we open up the polls, a few days earlier to vote? Why we got to vote on one day? We one of 4 states that don't even do that. We one of 4 states that we can't even vote early.
That passed the House last week, right?
Yeah, I heard it passed the House. Are we gonna get the Senate?
I think so.
All right.
Here, I think so. And what passed, unfortunately, does not involve doing anything for these municipal elections in 2023. There's nothing at all, because it was too late, too little, which from the beginning of the session, we were saying and others were saying must do now, understand the normal political process, but voting access happens to be at the core of everything that all of us friendly people care about. Voting access really isn't it at the center, and expanding it. So they're not going to do 2023. They are going to roll it out for 2024 per what passed out of the House, but they're still not requiring more than one location for the city of Hartford, for example. So, but yes, we are getting early voting, and the door is open to improve it in the future. But I would say, since given where we're at, another $6 million, I'm going to just be blunt, for the Voting Rights Act, the Connecticut Voting Rights Act, $6 million over 2 years, in the context of 200 million just showing up because people didn't know how to estimate correctly on the sales tax. Okay. 4 million of it would be bonded by the governor to buy a database, one time only. And the other 2 million would be just the staff expenditure over the next 2 fiscal years, which, let's be honest, when James Jeter told me that we were the state that thought up the notion of 3/5 of a person right here in Connecticut, and then other folks ran with it and made it official, I think that's the very least we could do, is be on the front end of saying, you know what, the Supreme Court destroyed the Voting Rights Act in 2013. All the blood, sweat, and tears that were shed by all those heroes and everyday people were just taken apart by the Supreme Court in 2013. No more preclearance. I guess there's no more white supremacy or racism in those places that don't have to ask anyone now if they're going to come around and change a polling place. They can just do it now. The whole point of the Voting Rights Act has been removed. I don't mean to be too harsh, but here's the thing, Bishop. What would you say if someone says, "What voter suppression in Connecticut? We don't have any voter suppression. What are you talking about?" What say you, Bishop?
Yeah, our voter suppression here in Connecticut is so veiled in what can be reasoned. But I ask folk here in my town, has your polling place changed in the last, say, 10 years, and nobody told you about it? One year we went to 3-4 different places before we found the right poll. And just because we were that committed to participating in the vote, we found the right place. It was all smoke and mirrors. And of course, there was a claim that they had sent information to us. Our address hasn't changed. We've been in the one same place. They're doing it right now. They're doing it right now, where they are literally sending out things and saying, "Hey, we're going to remove you if we don't hear from you." What? So all kinds of tricks are played here, and they don't play them in the same way in some townships like they play them here in what I would call our urban centers. It's a very interesting state of affairs. And in a place where you would think the Constitution state, right? Well, we would want participation from our constituents in a representative republic. This kind of form of democracy that we have. We vote for people who then get in and then do the policy making and the making. The policy setting and the lawmaking, and in these places and spaces, it appears at times we want the least participation.
Absolutely.
So voting rights is one of the it's a hotly contested. We have right now a voting rights campaign. We need to and we've been out there kind of beating this this drum for the last few years. You're absolutely right. There are issues yet that remain. All of our major cities here in Connecticut are some of the poorest cities in the country. That yet remains. Our unemployment rates are astronomical here and again in the capital city. While our taxes continue to go out the roof in places like Hartford or New Haven or Bridgeport or Waterbury, these are the same issues that were facing folk 20, 30 years ago, 20 plus years ago, when the center was formed. Criminal justice certainly still is on an issue that we've got to remain. We just got where we can at least get those who are formerly incarcerated get their ability to participate in the vote. But if they don't know how to do it, and if they don't stick with it, they won't get that vote. It is not an automatic thing. So there has to be still work done. We still have people who are coming into Connecticut vis-a-vis from other places across the world, and they find themselves here, and they find themselves in dire need of just basic services. And the vast majority of our urban centers receive those in those spaces and places, and the immigrant communities across the state are in dire need of support and services and resources. While Connecticut yet remains one of the richest, if not the richest per capita state in the United States.
I think it's I think it's the I think it's the one with the widest wealth gap between the rich and the poor.
Yeah. These are not new issues for us. And so I know for me, I may sound like a broken record because this is the stuff you and I talk about. We can't even get on the phone good without us hitting one of the 2 or 3 of these at any time. We're together. We're on these issues. But I named them, and I say that the work is here's another passage that I think is important from a Christian context, at least, and in a broader faith way. In the Gospels, one of the passages, it says, "Many are called, but few are chosen." And then it says, in another part of that text, it says, the harvest is plentiful. But who will be the laborers? Who will be those who will get out here and put some intention on the labor, on the work, so that we can then benefit from the harvest of that work? And I think that's actually the call of any and all of us who are justice loving. And let me just say this: okay, justice and fairness and anti this, that, and the third racism. Okay, that's all that language may get on you, make you whatever. I believe there are way too many fair-minded people that Dr. King said it like this. He said it good for me. He said it the best way that I've ever heard. He said, it's not those that are on the other side of our issues that I'm actually that concerned about. I'm more concerned. He says this very clearly in his letter from Birmingham jail. It's not the quote bad people that I'm worried about. Not too many of them. It's the good folk that sit around and don't say anything. That's who I'm concerned. It's the complicit ones. Those who will have conversation behind closed doors, but never will come in out into the light of the public square to have any opinions about it all. Say a bit more about what the center and the Collaborative Center for Justice aims to continue to be involved in. And I know your list is like our list with More Money. Where there's an issue, we're gonna find a way to get involved in it. But let's talk more about how we do that stuff. How do we do it? And I love the title of the organization, collaborative. It even in the name of it, we say we can't do it without doing it together. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Um, well, what, honestly, leadership development and, I feel like sometimes in organizing and advocacy, we go way too quick and we don't look out for the least of these among ourselves in terms of making the space for the individual to get what they need to take the steps forward to get out into that public square. We can be all in a hurry to talk about, passing this bill or doing this thing. But one of the things I'm looking at, for example, so, over in Windsor, there are, around 18 of these women religious that live in this retirement residence. And how do we do organizing training with them? Of course, in context of what's happening in the communities and the big picture, but how do we provide training opportunities based on their needs so that they can be the force they want to be reckoned with? And how do we do organizing training and that makes sense in, regular everyday people's lives, that is not set up to fail by being, this academic exercise where I just want to fall asleep and go home. I mean, and God forbid we do one more rally with talking heads where we just stand around and watch, 16 people come up to the podium and say their dog and pony show. If we never have another one of those, Bishop, I mean, it'll be too soon for me. I want us to do I want us to like ignite hearts and minds and do fun, creative things that people want to be involved with and would like to, let's figure out how to be energizing. And I think Jesus did say something. The word fun is not necessarily in one of the four gospels, the FUN, but there is something in there about a spirit of joy. There is something in there about well, for sure in the Old Testament it talks all about dancing. And I just feel like we need to do things that people want to be part of. I don't care what the issue is.
That's right.
Which is why I brought up the hot tub. That was fun.
That's right. And quite visually creative.
Yes.
Right. So Brother Teran, we got a few minutes left. We kind of over our time. Here's the commitment we made, and certainly we made it a long time ago, to continue to work together and be in each other's work and lives together. That somehow my prayer and my intention is on how do we bring folk along in this ever increasing context, cultural context that says we are in the land of steady habits. We are the frozen chosen. I mean, these are the phrases that culturally we those of us who would claim some New Englanderness, we find ourselves in. That is touted amongst us. And so when younger folk and new folk come to the scene, they run real fast, and then they get knocked down, or they get discouraged, or somehow get disillusioned, and so there they go by the wayside. And I'm reminded the battle is not given to the swift nor to the strong, but those who persevere, those who endure, those who continue. And so for me, it is of utmost importance. We got to keep trying to answer that question, Brother Teran, that you just raised. How do you take a small group of maybe aging congregational members? In our context, we're older. Let me just talk about me. I celebrated the birthday yesterday, and
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. And I have owned my eldership. Let me just say that right there. I own my own eldership, but it don't mean I'm ready to go sit in the corner anywhere. And so I think we got to answer that question. How do we, using the technology, that this forum, it is just for that. That we'll have a number who will watch us live, but then we have an even larger number that'll watch us over time. And prayerfully, my prayer is that they hear something that sparks faith to the point that will much like in the religious story that talks about those who were who were sick and had issues. They would sit by these pools. But Bethesda was one of those pools.
Yeah.
And the story is that every now and then an angel would stop by that pool and trouble the waters, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you got in there and got there first in the water, you might get healed in that troubled waters. That's where we get the song, "Wade in the water." Yeah. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's going to trouble the water. But that's where my faith is. And that's where my trust is. And I think it is countercultural and maybe even revolutionary to think that we could change some systems around here, and we could bring food to the hungry. And I don't mean doing it like a one-time thing. That we could actually eradicate hunger in our lifetime. That
we created it.
Yeah, we could stop homelessness.
Yeah.
We could. I mean, they did end slavery. Took them a war, took a little bit, but we did end it. And what I've said over and over again,
they didn't have to end, did it? Didn't have to end.
No, but we did, because we had the courage. Right, the courage and the perseverance to say, "Hey, we need something different in our society. We need something different in our circumstances. We need a different kind of way of doing who it is and being who we are as citizens, as members, as participants in the family of humanity." Right, and so for me, it is my faith, the center of the faith, that I believe that I believe in the goodness of us. I believe in that, and so we can. I want to touch and activate and help to activate those who would join us in that effort. How in this last few moments, how do folks get to know what the work it is that you're involved in, Brother Teran, and how do they get involved?
CC. So C is in Charlie, C is in Charlie, F is in Frank, J is in joke.org is it's Catholic social teaching centered social justice work that moves on all the issues I think a lot of the folks watching here would be interested in anyway. But that the other thing is just send me an email because I'm still new enough here. And Wednesday, if you can come, you can hear about the Voting Rights Act and the latest. We're going to have a call to action right there on the spot. And I'm making sure that we're going to do a call to action on the spot in the room that's not wiffly waffly, right? We're going to ask people to actually make a phone call to their state rep and their state senator on the spot in the room. And, you know, it's going to be fun and we're going to make it exciting. So 6 o'clock, Capital Community College in Hartford, 11th floor in the auditorium, dinner provided. Now it won't be steak or anything, but it'll be some decent enough food. And we're doing, you know, we're going to set up a Zoom. If somebody can't come in person, we're going to make sure folks can participate on hybrid. And so that is there too, Bishop. So that's Teran at ccfj.org. My first name, T as in Tom, ERAN as in Nancy, at ccfj.org. That's my new email. We can make sure that anybody who wants to is connected. So,
all right.
I want to do something fun, Bishop. I want to do something fun next time around, so that when people come to the things that we do, they feel better when they left than when they got there.
That's
and
right.
that it doesn't feel like something they had to give. It's something they got something out of.
Right. Well, but Teran, you know this, and I'll say this on this platform and publicly, you have our support. We're going to be praying for you in this new venture, in this new effort. Secondly, we you know, you call us, we come and running to do whatever we can to be of support and encouragement. And I wanna talk to you more about how we might do some training with folk within the context of these organizations. We've been working with a number of different groups across the state in some interesting spaces to talk about how our understanding of faith, you know, and however you call that, you know, for me, it you know, we can call, you know, we can talk about morals and morality. We can talk about what's right and wrong. We can talk about just, you know, in faith language, we can talk about righteousness and what does that mean? How you know, righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. I mean, I'm all off in the deep Christian roots right there. But how do we as faith folk live that out in particular ways? It is at the core. It is at the core. I was lastly, I was in my regular gig on Sunday mornings talking about this, and the Apostle Paul said it best, you know, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, the good news, for it has power for deliverance, for delivering people from where they were to where they maybe need to go, right? And I'm paraphrasing that text, but I believe that it is, there's something that's transcendent about naming and claiming and then really pulling that from wherever we pull from. I think it begins from within and then comes to without. It is the movement of the Spirit. Howard Thurman would call it in that. He would name it and phrase it in that sense. That our faith activates us and moves us into a larger and greater work where we're doing it and having it in common with each other. So blessings to you, man, and your new venture, this new space, this new vineyard, we'll call it that. And thank you for being willing to come on and share with us tonight and talk a little bit about faith and justice and the work of the Collaborative Center for Justice. I appreciate you, brother. And of course, you know, you'll be back again and again. How about that?
Sounds good to me.
All right. All right. Blessings to you. And good night, everybody. We'll talk to you again real soon. Peace.
Thank you, Bishop Sellers. Good night.